Failure is not an option. You've probably heard that line before, maybe in movies, maybe in motivational speeches. But here's the thing. For NASA in 1970, it wasn't a slogan. It was survival. Picture this. You're floating 200,000 miles from Earth, halfway to the moon, when suddenly your ship explodes. The lights go out. Oxygen starts vanishing. You're freezing, running out of power, and every system meant to save you is now trying to kill you. That's not science fiction. That's Apollo 13. And what happened next wasn't luck, it wasn't magic, it was pure human genius. A team of engineers, pilots, and one legendary flight director who refused to give up, racing against time to bring three men back from certain death. This is the real story of how the successful failure of Apollo 13 became one of the greatest rescue missions in history, and how quick thinking, teamwork, and a few rolls of duct tape turned a disaster into a miracle. Buckle up, because this isn't just about space. It's about what humans can do when there's no room left for failure. April 13th, 1970. The world is quiet, calm, and watching history unfold. Three astronauts, Jim Lovell, Jack Swigert, and Fred Haise, are floating 200,000 miles away from Earth, halfway to the moon. Everything's running smoothly. Then, out of nowhere, boom! A loud explosion tears through the spacecraft. The lights flicker. Alarms start screaming. Oxygen levels drop like a rock. The ship begins to twist in the darkness of space. Houston, we've had a problem. That one sentence, calm, steady, almost too calm, marked the beginning of one of NASA's most terrifying nights. In that moment, no one on Earth knew if those three men would ever come home. Down in Mission Control, dozens of engineers freeze, staring at their monitors. Red warning lights flash everywhere. Telemetry data makes no sense. Oxygen tanks showing zero, fuel cells dying, power systems failing one after another. The impossible is happening. The spacecraft that was supposed to take them to the moon is now slowly killing them. But here's the part that makes this story legendary. They didn't give up. Not the astronauts, not the engineers, not the man in the white vest leading the charge, Gene Kranz. Because when Kranz said failure is not an option, he wasn't giving a speech. He was fighting for lives. Over the next 4 days, NASA's best minds would attempt something no one had ever done before. Fix a dying spacecraft in deep space with no manual, no backup plan, and no second chances. This isn't just a story about space. It's a story about human genius under pressure. Because sometimes when everything breaks, that's when we discover what we're really capable of. Before everything went sideways, Apollo 13 was supposed to be routine. NASA had already done it twice before. Apollo 11 made history with Neil Armstrong's one small step, and Apollo 12 had proven it wasn't a one-time miracle. By 1970, landing on the moon had almost started to feel normal. People were already losing interest. The news barely covered it. It was just another trip to the moon. But for Commander Jim Lovell, this mission was personal. He'd orbited the moon before on Apollo 8, but never set foot on it. This time it was his shot, his chance to actually walk on that gray, silent surface. Alongside him were two other astronauts, Jack Swigert, the command module pilot who joined the crew at the last minute, and Fred Haise, the lunar module pilot. 3 men, 3 roles, 1 goal: to land on the moon and bring back more lunar rock samples. Simple. Everything about the launch looked perfect. On April 11th, 1970, Apollo 13 lifted off from Kennedy Space Center, Florida, riding on top of a roaring Saturn V rocket, the most powerful machine ever built. From liftoff to orbit, every system was stable. The crew was joking, relaxed, confident. Even Mission Control in Houston, led by Flight Director Gene Kranz, was calm. They'd done this before. Kranz himself was a legend inside NASA. White vest, flat-top haircut, sharp voice. The kind of man you'd trust in a storm. He believed in preparation, discipline, and one golden rule: tough and competent. To everyone watching, Apollo 13 was just another success in progress. The crew was cruising toward the moon at thousands of miles per hour, running system checks, chatting with the folks in Houston, and filming little video updates for TV. It felt routine, predictable, safe. But that's the funny thing about space. It doesn't care how prepared you are. You can have the smartest people, the best equipment, and years of planning, and one tiny hidden flaw can destroy everything. And tucked deep inside one of Apollo 13's oxygen tanks was exactly that, a small piece of bad wiring, damaged months before launch. Nobody knew it yet, but that tiny mistake was about to turn this routine mission into the most dramatic survival story NASA would ever tell. The crew had no idea what was waiting for them. They were laughing, eating dinner, planning for the moon, completely unaware that in just a few hours, one spark was going to change everything. It was April 13th, 1970, just after 9 p.m. Houston time. The mission had been smooth so far. The crew was joking around, filming a short broadcast to show viewers back on Earth what life in space looked like. Then came a routine order from Mission Control. Okay, 13, we'd like you to stir up the cryotanks. Sounds harmless, right? All Swigert had to do was flip a switch that mixed the liquid oxygen tanks, kind of like shaking up a soda bottle to keep it from freezing at the bottom. It was something they'd done dozens of times before. But this time, something was wrong. The second Swigert hit the switch, boom! A thunderous bang echoed through the spacecraft. The whole ship jolted violently. Lights flickered, alarms blared, and the astronauts were thrown in their seats. Okay, Houston, we've had a problem here. It's one of the calmest lines ever spoken in total chaos. You can almost hear the disbelief in Swigert's voice, like he's trying to stay calm while realizing something's gone horribly wrong. Back on Earth, in Mission Control, engineers froze. Every console lit up with red warnings. One screen showed the oxygen levels dropping. Another showed power disappearing. Within seconds, they were losing fuel cells. This is the spacecraft's main source of electricity. Gene Kranz and his team scrambled. Nobody understood what had happened. Was it a software glitch? A valve failure? Maybe a meteor strike? But the numbers didn't lie. Oxygen tank number 2 was completely gone, and tank number 1 was leaking fast. The command module, the crew's main ship, was dying. Oxygen didn't just mean air to breathe. It powered the fuel cells that made electricity. And without electricity, you lose heat, lights, guidance, water, basically everything. It's like being trapped in a car in the middle of the Arctic, with the engine off and the temperature dropping every second. The astronauts quickly looked out the small windows and saw a terrifying sight, a cloud of white gas venting into space. That was their oxygen, escaping into the void. Inside the spacecraft, the cabin pressure began to drop. Lights dimmed. The temperature started falling. Lovell, Swigert, and Haise switched into survival mode, trying to isolate the problem. But nothing was working. They were losing the battle. Lovell radioed down again. Houston, we are venting something out into space. It's definitely a gas of some sort. Mission Control's heart sank. They knew it was oxygen. They also knew what it meant. They had maybe hours before the command module completely shut down. It wasn't just a problem, it was a catastrophe. Later investigations would reveal that months earlier, during pre-flight testing, one of the oxygen tanks had been dropped by accident. It looked fine from the outside, but the drop had damaged a small wire inside. When the tank was stirred, that wire short-circuited, and the electrical spark ignited the liquid oxygen. That tiny spark caused an explosion that ripped through the tank, destroyed its insulation, and took out vital systems across the spacecraft. One hidden flaw, one switch, one explosion. And suddenly, 3 men were stranded in space, with a crippled ship, 200,000 miles from home. The moon was now out of the question. The only mission left was survival. The explosion turned Apollo 13 from a moon mission into a math problem with lives on the line. And NASA had exactly one tool that mattered more than rockets or computers. People who could think faster than the crisis changed. First up, survival triage. The command module, the crew's main living room and control center, was dying. So the obvious move was to get out of it. The astronauts crawled into the lunar module, a smaller spaceship built to land on the moon, and turned it into a lifeboat. Sounds simple, but it wasn't. That little lander was designed for 2 men for a couple of days on the lunar surface, not 3 men for 4 days in deep space. Everything had to be stretched, rationed, and reimagined. Step 1. Save power. The command module had the main batteries and fuel cells, but those batteries were failing. The crew shut down everything unnecessary, heaters off, lights off, even the radio when they could, to keep the limited power for the absolutely essential systems. Imagine sitting in a freezing car with the engine off and wrapping yourself in every blanket. That was them, but in space. Step 2, manage air. This became the scariest part. The lunar module had a way to scrub carbon dioxide, CO2, out of the air, but its filters were the wrong shape. The command module's filters were round canisters. The lunar module accepted square canisters. The result? CO2 was building up. Too much of it makes you dizzy, then unconscious, then dead. So what did they do? They improvised. On Earth, a group of engineers dumped every spare part they could find onto a table. Plastic bags, a sock-like material, duct tape, and a flight manual. For hours they tinkered until they built a simple adapter that let the round canisters from the command module plug into the lunar module's square receptacle. Then they talked the astronauts through building the same thing in space, step by step, voice by voice, like a frantic craft lesson. It sounds almost funny when you picture it, astronauts making a mailbox out of duct tape, but that jury-rigged filter saved their lives. It kept CO2 levels down long enough for them to survive the return trip. That's creativity turned into oxygen. Meanwhile, back in Houston, flight controllers were not just inventing hardware fixes, they were rewriting the mission in real time. The original plan to go to the moon was dead. The new plan? Get home. To do that, they had to change the spacecraft's path so it would loop back to Earth, and they had to do it without the main computer on the command module. So NASA used what they had, the lunar module's descent engine. This engine was built to slow a lander down for a moon touchdown, not to steer a crippled spacecraft home. But it worked. The crew fired the engine in carefully measured bursts to tweak their trajectory. Every burn had to be precise. Too much or too little would either miss Earth or make re-entry angles deadly. The pressure in mission control was enormous. The whole world was watching, but nobody could do the final work except the people in the room. And then there were the checklists. Normally, mission procedures are buttoned up and rehearsed. For Apollo 13, those checklists were useless in their original form. So engineers in Houston wrote brand new procedures. Step-by-step instructions for powering up the command module at the end of the trip with a dead main bus, for conserving water and heat, for reprogramming systems that weren't meant to be used that way. They practiced the procedures in simulators until they were perfect, then read them to the crew over the radio. Picture the scene, worried faces lit by console light, men hunched over printouts, someone whispering a sequence of switches and seconds into a headset, and a 3-man crew following those words, trusting them with everything. That trust between the astronauts and the people on the ground is a big part of why they made it. The race continued. Improvise filters, conserve power, plot burns, run new checklists, and keep the crew alive despite the cold and the creeping fatigue. Small fixes and tiny decisions compounded into survival. Every piece of duct tape, every simulated run in Houston, every calm order from Gene Kranz mattered. In short, Apollo 13 didn't survive because of luck. It survived because a handful of smart people refused to accept the impossible. They treated the mission like a puzzle, and they solved it, piece by piece, with nothing but brains, grit, and a stubborn refusal to give up. After days of freezing, rationing, and endless calculations, it all came down to this: re-entry. The crew had survived the explosion, the power crisis, and the buildup of CO2. But now came the most dangerous part of all: coming home. Because you can fix a broken spacecraft, you can improvise filters, you can change your course in space, but none of that matters if you can't make it safely through Earth's atmosphere. And here's the terrifying part. Apollo 13 wasn't supposed to re-enter the way it was now. The ship was crippled, half dead, and completely off the original plan. Everything had been powered down to save electricity, So when it was finally time to turn the systems back on, everything had to be done manually, in perfect sequence, with no mistakes. One wrong switch, one surge of power, one mistimed burn, and the whole ship could overheat, spin off course, or burn up on re-entry. In Houston, Gene Kranz and his team had been simulating this for days. They'd written and tested a brand new startup procedure for the command module, from scratch. They had practiced it over and over in simulators until it worked exactly right. And now they were reading it step by step to the crew, like a lifeline. Inside the spacecraft, it was cold enough to see their breath. The walls were covered in frost. The astronauts' hands were numb, their faces pale from exhaustion. They'd been awake for nearly 4 days straight, but they followed every word from mission control, carefully bringing the command module back to life. When the moment came, they jettisoned the lunar module, the lifeboat that had kept them alive all this time. Watching it drift away into space was emotional. That tiny lander had become their home, their savior. Now it was gone, left behind to vanish into the void. And then, silence, just the hum of instruments, the creak of metal, and the sound of 3 men breathing, waiting for re-entry. At exactly the right moment, they fired the small engines one last time, a precise burn that would angle them just right to hit Earth's atmosphere. Too steep, and they'd burn up. Too shallow, and they'd skip off the atmosphere like a stone on water and be lost forever. The math had to be perfect. As they entered the upper layers of the atmosphere, plasma began to form around the capsule. Temperatures outside soared to thousands of degrees. For a few terrifying minutes, the ionized air blocked all radio signals. NASA called it the blackout. On the ground, mission control went silent. The only sound was the ticking of a clock. Every second felt like an hour. Normally, that radio silence lasted about 3 minutes. This time, it stretched longer. 4 minutes, 4.5, still nothing. Gene Kranz stared at his console, unmoving. Reporters held their breath. The world waited. And then, static. A faint crackle. A voice. "Okay, Houston, we're home." The room exploded in cheers. People were hugging, crying, throwing papers in the air. Gene Kranz, the man who'd kept it all together, finally let his shoulders drop. They had done it. Apollo 13 splashed down safely in the Pacific Ocean, near the recovery ships waiting below. After traveling over 600,000 miles through space, surviving an explosion, freezing temperatures, and near suffocation, all 3 men were alive. Every decision, every calculation, every sleepless hour, it had all paid off. They had beaten the odds. Against all logic, against all probability, they made it home. When Apollo 13 splashed down, it wasn't just the end of a crisis. It was proof of what human beings are capable of when everything is on the line. 3 astronauts had just come back from what should have been a death sentence. And yet, not a single life was lost. Why? Because a group of people refused to accept failure as an option. You see, everyone remembers the line, "Failure is not an option." But for Gene Kranz, that wasn't a movie quote. That was a mindset. Kranz's leadership didn't come from flashy speeches or heroic gestures. It came from discipline, preparation, and an unshakable belief that no one, absolutely no one, would die on his watch. In his own words, Kranz told his team long before Apollo 13 ever launched, "We will be tough and we will be competent." Tough meant they would never give up, no matter how bad it got. Competent meant they would always be ready, trained, tested, and sharper than the crisis itself. And that mindset, that culture of excellence, is what saved Apollo 13. Think about it. These were engineers, scientists, flight directors, people in shirts and headsets staring at blinking screens. They weren't the ones in space, but they were just as much a part of the mission. Every problem that came their way was something no manual could explain. No backup plan existed. And yet, they created solutions in real time, using slide rules, not supercomputers, using pencils, not touchscreens, using pure logic, teamwork, and grit. That's the real genius of Apollo 13. Not the technology, not the rockets, but the people behind them. The ones who stayed calm when everything was falling apart. The ones who trusted each other enough to make impossible decisions. and then make them work. The mission also changed NASA forever. Every failure, every close call became a lesson. New safety procedures were born. New systems were tested. Every mission after Apollo 13 carried the imprint of that night when NASA almost lost everything and refused to. And maybe that's the biggest takeaway. Sometimes success doesn't mean achieving the goal. Sometimes it means surviving the impossible and coming home alive. Apollo 13 didn't land on the moon, but it showed something far more powerful, that even when everything breaks, teamwork, preparation, and the will to keep going can still bring you home. And that's why the world still remembers Apollo 13. Not as a failure, but as one of humanity's finest hours. Though, the more I think about Apollo 13, the more it feels less like a space story and more like a human story. And it's not just about rockets or NASA or astronauts. It's about what people can do when they decide failure is not an option. It's about teamwork under pressure, calm minds in chaos, and the kind of quiet genius that never makes headlines, but saves lives. When you zoom out, it's almost poetic. Three men stranded hundreds of thousands of miles from Earth, held together by nothing but math, trust, and a handful of voices in Houston saying, "We've got you." And it worked. Against all odds, it actually worked. That's what makes this story timeless. Because whether you're launching rockets or just trying to get through life, the lesson is the same. When everything seems to be falling apart, don't panic. Don't give up. Step back, think, and remember, there's always a way home. So if stories like this fascinate you, stories about courage, innovation, and the people who make the impossible possible, you're in the right place. Hit that subscribe button, give the video a like, and tap the bell icon so you don't miss the next one. Because we've got plenty more untold stories of disasters turned into triumphs, of people who refused to quit, and of moments that changed history forever. This was Apollo 13, the disaster that never became one.